Hi, good morning. We're live. So welcome to Seinfeld with this morning's discussion focused on the seven. So where would folks like to start?
Well, I thought it was a great episode. I kind of related to the whole naming the kid thing because I often think about like when names come up, like, oh, do I know somebody with that name? Like, do I want my child to be named after them? And so when George was talking about naming their kid Seven, I was like, well, I understand why he would want it. It's like unique. It has some kind of, personal meaning to him. But at the same time, I was like, it's a little ridiculous. Like when celebrities name their kids like after these like weird things.
Well, it is Mickey Mantle, though.
Yeah, that's true.
with complete unfettered bias.
Yes.
So a couple things. Number one, actually, let's focus really on George, keeping this fictional. This is not the first time that George would have done something like this. In terms of, I forgot the word you used, but basically highly personalized, maybe a little quirky. Mm-hmm. George has a very difficult time taking others' opinions into account. And I think that certainly motivates and drives the character. And he's not the only character in this situational comedy that is egocentric. I think that there's a couple teaching points here, and one is referred to as, or can be conceptualized as, egocentrism. And that's, in this case, is George's incapacity to view anything from anyone's perspective but his own. Even when, during labor, you could tell that he's kind of not there for her. He's there for him and that name. That should, and if anyone who's actually watched any episode of this situational comedy, that would have not have surprised anybody. Which brings us to our second teaching point, in that whatever it is we're tapping into here seems to be very stable. That is, for George Costanza, this is not a behavior in a vacuum. This looks like a pattern of recurrent behavior, which then kind of puts it on our radar as psychiatrists. Which piggybacks my third teaching point, and that is, when we focus on human behavior and when we focus on potentially abnormal human behavior, everyone's initial thought should be that it is completely normal until proven otherwise, right? It's only when it becomes recurrent and maladaptive should the psychiatrist begin to consider to render a medical opinion, right? And just by way of practice, and again, this certainly is included in other aspects of medicine, not only psychiatry, but irrespective of why an individual may have made a clinic appointment to see you, irrespective of, quote unquote, the reason for consultation. I'd like you to try to train your brain into walking into that room and thinking it's completely normal. Even if 5 minutes later you have evidence to the contrary, and boy, you're off in terms of case formulation, most likely diagnosis. And that actually is going to be reflected on exams too. You are going to get some exam questions on your shelf where choice A, normal behavior, or nothing further to do, or reassurance is the single best answer. Right? You're going to be tempted, especially when you go through rotations, because it is so skewed in terms of the reason for consultation, to suggest I could skip this and still be right 99.9% of the time. What I'm going to ask you as a future physician is that you focus on that 0.1% and still think along the lines of completely normal until proven otherwise, even if it takes you an extra 5 or 10 minutes to prove otherwise, 99.9% of the time. That's George. Any other behaviors of George you want to discuss this morning? Anything else you observed? Other characters, the seven.
Jerry's kind of obsessed too about finding out why this woman is wearing sandals all the time.
Yeah. So you used a clinical term there, obsessed. Somebody tell me what is an obsession?
You can't really get it out of your mind, no matter when you try to trail off, you can't redirect. It's like it becomes and it affects you for a prolonged period of time.
Yep, right. That's exactly right. So it's an intrusive thought, when obsessions actually result in clinical significance and clinical significance operationalized by the APA, written in the DSM, is when the behavior, or in this case the thought, results in clinically significant distress or impairment in functioning. That's always going to be your operational definition as quote-unquote pathological or disordered. Differentiate then from me, and kind of just already threw you a little bit of a hint, the obsession from what many clinicians might refer to as an overvalued idea. What differentiates A from B there?
Like, because he also didn't get like the hints, like in this specific situation, right? Like she was trying to get him to leave, but he wasn't truly like understanding and operationalizing. And then with the dress, he started looking around the apartment. He couldn't like just sit still and think about the thought. He had to act on it. The compulsion.
The fact that he acts on the thought certainly connotes maybe a level of severity that otherwise would not have been there. On exams, though, and clinical practice as well, about 20% of individuals with OCD, with obsessive compulsive disorder, will have obsessions only. The vast majority, 80%, will have both compulsions and obsessions. And in either case, the single best answer is going to be OCD. Now, if I were going to write a question for a board exam, for a shelf exam, I would make that, I'd get you in that 20%. I want to see if you know the definition. Because if I can demonstrate in a case vignette someone with clinically significant obsessions and discreetly tell you that there's no evidence of compulsions or compulsive behavior, single best answer is still OCD. So, good point. And it does come up in exams. What is the overvalued idea? And how does it differentiate from the obsession? And the answer is clinical significance. When somebody has an intrusive thought that is not resulting in clinically significant distress or impairment in functioning, we usually call that an overvalued idea. How do both differentiate from a delusion? Now, what we're discussing are all deficits in mental status testing, specifically in the domain of thought or thought content. Right? So some common examples of deficits of thought content or in thought content include the overvalued idea, the obsession, the delusion.
I would say like being able to understand like reality. Like if you have a delusion, you don't know whether it's real or not. If you have overvalued ideas or obsessions, you know that they're not necessarily real, but they're affecting you either poorly or just being there.
That's exactly right. And the words you used actually are words that might appear on an exam, so pay close attention to them, right? You use the word reality, right? So in the case of the obsession, in the case of the delusion, they're not likely to be reality-based, right? Even obsessions may not be reality-based. What differentiates those is exactly what you highlighted, and that is insight. The individual with the obsession has a level of insight that allows them to say, this is distressing because, and they're not going to use these words, but they're going to relay to you that it's a product of their mind. The person with the delusion is unable to do that because of a profound lack of insight. Right? So they're going to be rigid in their belief. Right? Whereas the level of insight that usually characterizes the obsession is going to allow them to discuss it as distressing, but understanding that it is a product of their own mind. Right? Now, how you actually get the person to demonstrate that in the clinical interview varies. But at some point after the 30 or 60 minutes you spend with a patient, you'll have reached one conclusion or the other. Now, it's not always easy. You could still finish that clinical interview realizing, I'm not sure what's going on here, which as physicians sometimes happens. All right, overvalued idea, the obsession, the delusion, 3 discrete grades of severity of that abnormal thought, of that deficit in thought content. Anything else with Jerry? Is Jerry's, the observation of Jerry Seinfeld, the character, in the 7, overvalued idea, obsession, delusion?
I'd say obsession.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
I agree. What other behaviors did you observe in Jerry? Or any other character you'd like to discuss for that matter?
With Jerry, I thought it was interesting how he wanted to keep a log of all the items that the brother, was that his brother or his friend? I'm not really sure.
Kramer.
His friend Kramer was like taking out of his fridge, but he had no trouble going through this woman's closet. I thought that was a cute little contradiction.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now, again, in his defense, if we're going to start out thinking, oh, it's completely normal, you do have to rely on the quote-unquote patient history, i.e. have watched previous episodes of the situational comedy to really understand the character, to get to know the character. What Kramer does has been pretty significant over the course of the 9 seasons of the situational comedy. However, if we are provided information to the contrary, we move off that initial point of normality and begin to discuss the abnormal behavior of Jerry Seinfeld in terms of saying one thing and perhaps doing another. And if we are to go there, as psychiatrists, we always ask the question, why? And I think then it pivots to your discussion. It's because he's obsessed. He has an obsession that he's acting on.
Well, Kramer doesn't understand like situational boundaries or boundaries in general. He just like walks in, eats out of the fridge, and then when he takes things very literally as well. So when Elaine like talks about the bike and says like anybody who could fix my neck can have the bike, he's like, oh, I'll do it, and then he's like, now I want the bike, and she's like, wait, no, that was just kind of me expressing that I want to do something. So I think he takes things very literally and also doesn't understand like boundaries.
All right, so there's a couple things to tackle here because you really nailed this one. All right, so first let's look at the concrete nature in which Kramer interprets different interactions with, in this case, his friends, both Jerry and Elaine. Again, if you've seen the situational comedy and if you've seen it through the 9 seasons and even seen the finale, I think the final scene of the final episode is a flashback to the first time these two met. So Jerry just moved into that apartment, and his neighbor comes across, and he makes a comment, help yourself, basically, su casa ma casa, mi casa, meaning, my house is your house. And Kramer absolutely interprets that in a very literal sense, and for 9 straight seasons helps himself to Jerry's home and refrigerator, and his bed, his shower. I mean, there are multiple intrusions into Jerry's privacy because of that concrete reasoning, because of those concrete operations. How would this be reflected on a mental status exam? If you didn't have the time or energy to invest 9 full seasons, similar, when you meet a patient for the first time, initial interview, you don't get their full history. You might tap into the history, though, in this slice of life called the psychiatric assessment, more specifically the mental status examination. What part of the MSE is going to disclose all that information for you, or at least give you a hint into that?
The idioms, like where you're like, man grasping at straws.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That's right. Right. So again, the subtest for this abstract reasoning actually is pulled from the intelligence scale for adults. So it's actually a reliable clinical instrument. It's part of the IQ test, and because it is part of the routine IQ test, the WAIS, the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. Well, I don't even know what revision it's at right now, but it's actually from validated tests. Less validity than it is then reliable, though, right? But very reliable. We know that single question to start at that an adult of average intelligence would be able to successfully answer. Okay? A drowning man will clutch at a straw is that singular question. If they get it right, they actually, on the IQ test, would be of quote-unquote average intelligence, about 100, for that subtest. They get it wrong, the answer is no. So it's not, what's the word? It's not quantitative, but it's a qualitative single question. If the individual's answer, if your patient's answer includes a drowning man or a straw, concrete reasoning. And that's Kramer. And we didn't get to ask him that, but I know for a fact his answer would include a drowning man and or a straw. Right? What if they actually are able to abstract? So what it means is when I'm desperate, I'll almost do anything. Right? While they are abstracting and while they are not concrete, there is a deficit that they are demonstrating in that answer, and it's called personalized. Right? So concrete and personalized are 2 potential deficits to uncover on routine mental status exam testing for abstract reasoning at your bedside assessment. That's Kramer. The other point you made is that his social IQ is probably also 2 standard deviations below the mean. And here, there's a significant differential that we can discuss. And since we only have about 5 minutes left, we're not going to really get into it right now. But I do want to know your initial thoughts. Anything come to mind? Anything you would consider, given his lack of awareness of social boundaries, his social awkwardness? Yeah, so that's one thing I'd want to know is a child history, a developmental history that might be consistent with an autism spectrum disorder. That's certainly, I think, well within reason. And then what might there be something else in your differential?
I would say like OCD definitely, because like if he's having these thoughts in his head, he's consciously overridden by the obsessions and pushing all these things out. So we may understand them, but it may not be overtly available to us unless we understand his thought process.
Okay. So you're going to include the anxiety disorders, rule out OCD in your differential? Yeah. The other thing to consider is a cluster A personality, schizotypal versus schizoid personality. That's another thing to consider. And they're definitely, you have to trust me on this, if you're not a Seinfeld, that's actually the show, the fan of the show. He does have traits that are consistent with a paranoid personality as well. And that shouldn't surprise anyone, because the reason we call it cluster A is that they do have overlap, that is, these three conditions do have overlapping signs and symptoms, hence they cluster these three groups of disorders: the schizoid, the schizotypal personality, and the paranoid personality. Right? I don't know if Kramer has any one discretely, but he certainly has a cluster of symptoms that is consistent with these personality disorders. Rule out ASD, rule out anxiety disorder. 2 minutes left. Any other characters, any other scenes you'd like to discuss?
I thought it was kind of funny and ironic how, like, when Kramer was trying to, like, split stuff with Jerry and trying to be more, like, literally, like, splitting the banana and writing it down and, like, the half the soda, even though, like, Jerry was like, when you break the little thing in the top, it's yours. Like, it loses its value. And he didn't really understand that. But then at the end, when Newman was like, okay, we're going to split the bike in half, that's when the buck stopped for him. Yeah, so I just thought that was funny.
Yeah, it definitely plays a role there. I'm trying to figure out what defense mechanism that would be. That,
it's like when someone said it to him, it didn't make sense, but then when he was doing it, I don't know.
Yeah.
It could also be that he like took that in, said, oh, this is like what other people consider to be like a part of the normal context of society, and then applied it in that situation, which is also a very like interesting idea and could like help with the differential a little bit.
That's good. That's a good point. Yeah.
It's so interesting that Newman was the voice of reason.
Partial person. I was like,
yeah, he's got his own personality issues as well, and for him to actually do that and sound like the most logical person in the entire episode was profound to me.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Newman is kind of the forgotten character. Sometimes, especially when he's a prominent character in a particular episode, he does his opinion does kind of serve as a basis by which others, the other four, behaviors can actually be judged or be interpreted. And it's usually the other way, though. It's usually that he is off the rails and makes, like, for instance, George Costanza look, quote unquote, normal, more normative. Not this time. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, it's interesting. Are we going to leave it here? 20 after.